Welcome to the lesson number 3, the bow as the bridge. And this lesson I want to begin with the Violoncello da Spalla to demonstrate the point and then use a snippet from one of my recordings which I've done a couple of years ago here at a church in Delft, just around the corner from where I live. So I want to begin with the Violoncello da Spalla and then demonstrate the same thing with the violin or the viola. However, by now probably you can see how the technique is directly transferable. So I'm going to attach the belt under the tailpiece. I'm going to hang the instrument. It's a little bit tricky with the glasses. Yeah, I was wondering why it feels so short. Okay. Now this is the correct length. So the bow as the bridge. In the previous lesson, I mentioned something crucially important, and I truly hope that you heard me. The point of contact between the bow and the string is not somewhere high when you play the violin or the viola. It is literally right in front of your chest, approximately where your heart is. So when you play the instrument this way, when you hold the instrument, when you play this instrument this way, the feeling is very different, and you might feel a little bit awkward if you are just beginning to try this. But when you have tried this for a few days, even on the violin or the viola, maybe, just maybe, you might begin feeling this point of connection, that bridge between yourself, your expression, and your audiences. You might even want to record yourself and just see and try to discover how it is different, how it comes across differently. Maybe it will sound awkward, maybe it sounds very far from anything you would call acceptable on the professional level, but still, at this point, it's just about the emotion. You have all these days and weeks to really learn the technique, maybe not master, but learn the technique. But to begin with, I would love to encourage you to experiment, and do not be afraid that maybe you do not sound perfect immediately. This is completely fine. It might take you days and weeks, as I mentioned. So here's the important thing. Once you have adjusted the belt, when you're holding the instrument in the correct optimal posture, when you start playing the instrument, here's the mistake a lot of violin and viola players make. Their bowing speed is way too fast for the Violoncello da Spalla. And you need to learn that more intentional bowing and bowing speed on the Violoncello da Spalla, especially in the beginning when you're just starting. You could try to do this with violin or viola. Tune it a fifth, maybe even an octave lower. Let's say tune it as low as you possibly can. This will already give you some closer feeling about what it feels like really on the Violoncello da Spalla, given of course the string tension is just right on the Violoncello da Spalla, because the strings are built for this pitch. These are custom-made Violoncello da Spalla strings. But because the strings are thicker, you need to learn that slower bowing technique, intentional bowing technique. Now this sounds far from anything optimal for a very simple reason. The microphone is right here, and this is why I would like to share a short snippet from one of my recordings that I've done just a couple of years ago. So are you beginning to feel a little bit closer to the Violoncello da Spalla? Are you beginning to discover how you could easily transfer your violin or viola technique to this instrument? And once you do, everything just feels much more natural, and now you're really sounding in the bass range. And the sound is somewhere between the modern cello, which apparently, according to some sources from the late 18th century, they called the violone rather than violoncello in the early 18th or 17th centuries. But you sound somewhere between that big instrument and maybe violin, maybe even viola. Also because we have the E string. And again, and this is very important, this instrument of course doesn't sound as loud as a modern cello, but it turns out, and think about it, it turns out that the subtlest things in music and even in life are very rarely shouted but whispered. And this instrument gives you practically endless spectrum of soft and more subtle tones. With that said, it doesn't mean that this instrument can sound loud enough for concert halls for 2,000, 5,000 people, where I did perform with a number of groups as a soloist without mics, without amplification. So, with this said, practice your bowing, even if you do not have maybe the Violoncello da Spalla, just practice, just see and try to feel how this might work on a proper instrument. And with that said, go ahead to the next lesson and let's dive into details of the fingering technique, which is another area you might have to adapt just very slightly to this instrument because it is indeed a little bit larger. Playing posture is slightly different, which is an issue which you can overcome very easily, but also gives you huge advantage because it is in this posture that you can easier reach far larger distances on the string. So with that said, practice, and I see you in the next lesson.